Well, they think that it would be fun to wrap themselves around the feet of the tall man and make him fall over. Okay, now that brings me to rates, because the rate was funny this morning. Again, this is from Greg Wilcox over at the Loan Factory. He sends me this every Tuesday morning. He said, "Good morning, Lee. I think I'm turning Japanese. I really think so." And then he quotes the Vapors, who apparently sing this song. Greenland and Japan drama punched rates in the face this morning, as mortgage rates gains from the last week have evaporated. Rates moved up between 12.5 bips to 25 bips, or a quarter of a point this morning. Bonds hate surprises. Let's hope things cool down soon. Make it a great day. I'm going to give you some other news that will help you understand and process why that's occurring. But here are rates for right now. FHA ticked up. It's currently sitting at 6.12. VA ticked up, currently at 5.748. USDA 30-year ticked up 6.282. First-time homebuyers is now at 6.455. We were almost below 6 on all of these last week. So when you hear these numbers, you guys, it helps you understand why we are removing ourselves from the retail construction space in this season, because rates have gone up and affordability on retail properties is difficult for a lot of folks. So we are seeing reduced sales, we're seeing reduced pricing, and we're seeing elongated sales times. We've gone from selling a house in 90 days to selling a house in 180 days. And so when you think of the cost of carry, which is your cost of capital, your cost of insurance, your cost of utilities, your cost of taxes, all of those things now get elongated 90 days, which means you have to get the properties for a much, much lower price. We're not seeing that flexibility in the selling market yet. We're also anticipating an uptick in foreclosures, because with rates doing what they're doing, homeowners that are already living on the fringe and they need to sell now, half of their buyers just went away. Remember, for every quarter point increase or decrease, 5 million potential buyers are affected. So when rates go up a quarter of a point, 5 million people can no longer afford to buy a home. When interest rates drop a quarter point, 5 million people can now suddenly afford to buy a home. So rates are so critically important, you guys, in our industry and our business. So you need to understand how they work, why they work, and how it affects the general market overall. Okay. Let's talk briefly about the Federal Reserve, because I was hoping we would see a new Fed chair in May, which we will. But the investigation into Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell is likely to backfire. The Fed expects to resist rate cuts for now, and Powell is considering hanging around longer. His term as Fed chair ends in May. That's true. New Fed chair will be replaced. But his term as a governor of the Fed's board doesn't run out until January 2028. So knowing Powell, which I don't know him personally, but knowing of Powell, he's going to stick around just out of spite, which is fine. I'd probably do the same thing if I were him, but he will still now have influence over rates. So whoever is installed as the new Fed chair is going to have Powell going, no, 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 I vote no. And so that could create some challenges for rates. Finance, I talked about this last week, but there's some additional commentary you need to be aware of. President Trump wants a temporary 10% cap on credit card interest rates. The idea would have dire consequences for the profitability of card issuers. The banking industry says a 10% ceiling on credit cards rates, roughly half the level of today's average APR, would upend the basic economies or economics of the industry. Most banks would respond by cutting credit limits, closing riskier accounts, and curbing rewards. We talked about this last week. Supporters say the banking industry could trim rates and still make a profit. An interest rate cap would likely take an act of Congress. Legal challenges to implementing the policy via executive order, as Trump intends, would be certain. Some lawmakers are in favor, but any pullback in card lending by banks would aid buy now, pay later lenders like Klarna and Affirm, and personal lenders like SoFi, Upstart, and Lending Club would almost be destroyed. So it would be incredibly disruptive. I don't think it's going to happen. Again, I think it's just, it's creating news to distract from other things that are going on in other places. So let's talk about housing. Trump also wants a ban on big investors buying single-family homes and wants Congress to codify it. Around 7% of single-family rentals are held by investors with at least 100 homes. The proposal would apply only to new purchases and wouldn't force institutional investors to sell their existing rental portfolios. Trump's proposal could end up in ongoing housing reform efforts. Neither of the two housing reform bills being debated in Congress include explicit bans on institutional owners, but the White House expects recent push to lower housing costs will galvanize the ongoing negotiations, which may take up Trump's proposal. The impact on the current housing market would be small. The share of sales involving institutional investors has increased in recent years, but remains just 2.5% of total home purchases. So I want you guys to be aware of that number. Institutions represent 2.5% of all home purchases. However, it is higher in areas like Atlanta, Phoenix, Dallas, and Houston. While banning additional purchase would have a small impact on house prices in a stable housing market, the absence of institutional investors would likely hurt home prices during a housing downturn. Foreclosures. Okay, if we don't have that category of buyers, we'll see more of that. Fannie and Freddie are increasing purchases of mortgage-backed securities. Trump has directed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to purchase $200 billion in mortgage-backed securities to lower the rate on 30-year fixed-rate mortgages. As early January, the spread between the two was 198 basis points. Fannie and Freddie have expanded their MBS portfolio since last year prior to Trump's order. Average mortgage rates could potentially go as low as 6% this year. Trump could use Fannie and Freddie to lower rates in other ways, such as lowering the fees that lenders pay the two agencies for providing a guarantee of mortgage payments on MBS. These fees average 65 basis points in 2024. Addressing housing affordability has become a high priority for the White House. So a lot of attention going into this housing issue, so be aware of it. Okay, two more things. How am I doing on time? All right, two more things. Guns. Gun purchases continue to decline. For the fifth consecutive year, FBI background checks for firearms, a close proxy for actual gun buyers, have declined, dropping to 26.1 million in 2025, a 7% dip. Gun ownership saturation is likely one reason for the sales slip. As Americans rushed to arm themselves during the early years of the pandemic, violent crime, often a trigger for gun purchases, also is down overall nationally. Illinois led the nation in background checks last year with 2.55 million, closely followed by Kentucky, then Texas, then California. Californians arming themselves at a faster pace than they ever have, and Florida, because guns are really helpful when battling hurricanes. I don't know what that means. It's just interesting that Florida has an uptick in gun ownership. Illinois makes sense to me. Illinois, for sure. Okay, last one I want to mention, alcohol. These are tough times for American whiskey and spirit makers. Several distillers have filed for bankruptcy during the past year, and the maker of Jim Beam will pause production of the popular bourbon at its Maine, Kentucky distillery for 2026 amid slumping sales and inventory backups. Jim Beam. It's like 100 years old. Has anybody ever been to the Jim Beam distillery in Tennessee? It's really cool. I actually got my picture taken with little Jim Beam because he was only 5'2". He was a little guy. They got a statue out front of the building, so you can get your picture taken with Jim Beam. As well as Lawrence Welk. If you go down to California, you could, and he was really tall. Lawrence Welk was like 6'3". I don't know if you knew that. The reasons are varied, serving up a perfect storm for liquor makers. Alcohol consumption among Americans is down, due in part to health concerns. That's good news. Liquor exports have declined in the past year as a result of trade and trade tariffs and boycotts in Canada of U.S. alcohol, a response to U.S. tariffs on the nation. And President Trump's repeated call to annex Canada have taken a toll on sales. Jacqueline and I were in Canada in September, and we went into several restaurants, and they had like X'd out Jim Beam on the menu. They weren't even offering American-made liquor on their menu anymore. So Canada's a little upset at the U.S. and no longer selling its whiskey, and that's, of course, affecting things. So be aware of that. That is what's happening in the news. Subscribe for weekly deal trading and strategy drops.